Hello, everyone. My name is Bryan Skarlatos with Kostelanetz and Fink, and I'd like to welcome you to today's interview with Damon Rowe, the director of the newly created IRS Fraud Enforcement Office, and Carolyn Schenck, IRS Chief Counsel's National Fraud Counsel. As part of the IRS's continuing focus on compliance issues, the Internal Revenue Service announced recently that it was creating a fraud enforcement office and that Damon would be its first director. The new office resides in the IRS Small Business Self-Employed Division, and they work on agency-wide compliance issues involving fraud enforcement, and they have strategic plans, they've got their policies, they've got programs. And in addition, the IRS's Office of Chief Counsel has designated Carolyn Schenck to be the National Fraud Counsel, and she is working together with Damon in assisting the Fraud Enforcement Office in carrying out its mission. So let me introduce Damon and Carolyn. Damon is a veteran of IRS criminal investigations. Prior to his position at the Fraud Enforcement Office, Damon served as the Executive Director of International Operations for Criminal Investigation, where he was responsible for ensuring international law enforcement cooperation between foreign governments. Carolyn has been employed with the Internal Revenue Service Office of Chief Counsel for 14 years. She's litigated numerous cases in the United States Tax Court on behalf of the IRS, and she also works with IRS special enforcement agents on cases involving fraud. She has also assisted the Department of Justice in cases involving criminal tax prosecutions. So, Carolyn and Damon, with that introduction, I'd like to ask you about this Fraud Enforcement Office. Can you tell our audience what is it and what does it do?
Certainly. I want to first say thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here and glad to be able to speak to your audience. The Office of Fraud Enforcement, it was born out of a former program called the National Fraud Program. And what we did in March of this year is really when it opened up. We took the best things of the National Fraud Program, brought them forward, then added some additional things to make this office really work well and be really effective against fraud. One of the best things we were able to do was ask for a National Fraud Counsel, and that's Carolyn Schenck. We never had that before. We never had that close partnership. And as probably you'll hear later in the podcast, why this partnership works so well. The fraud office in general, it's a level setting. We're kind of the frontline defenders for the abundance of people who pay their taxes on time and try and do everything right. They want to know that those people who are dealing in nefarious activities are also being held accountable for getting everything right and penalized in the appropriate structure or given over to CI. I often say that we defend fraud in all four corners of the IRS, and that's certainly what this fraud office does. So we have a bevy of programs that we're responsible for, anything from syndicated conservation easement to wagering excise tax. And so anybody who's kept up with the tax world knows that microcap syndicated conservation easements and high-income non-filers are on the tip of everybody's tongue. But that is just like the front door for us. So the fraud office has to defend against the front door, the back door, the windows, everything to make sure that we're in all the areas of all the compliance areas to make sure that we are rooting out fraud and making level setting the field for everyone. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I do have to say that it's different in our approach because of the people that we brought on. We have lawyers, we have CPAs, we have career compliance officers. We are definitely leveraging data scientists, and you'll probably hear more about our data analytics. So I think it makes it a very powerful office to be in right now, and we're super excited, to have opened in March. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Damon. That helps a lot. So can you tell us sort of how you interact with other agencies at the IRS and specifically with civil auditors? And, where are you getting your cases? How do you get involved with the taxpayers on the ground?
Certainly. The frontline compliance officers are they're kind of the first ones that see activity. And as they see firm indicators of fraud, then they call our office. So, they might see badges of fraud like omission of income, or they see it, they put something in someone else's name, or if it's an insolvency matter, they quit claim the deed within 120 days of them filing bankruptcy. And when they notice those things, those first indicators, they give us a call. And then we have these fraud enforcement advisors who are really fraud experts that can help piece together the entire puzzle. And so they kind of work hand in hand with the compliance agents and compliance officers to work to develop to see if this is actually a fraud case that needs to go forward. And that case can take on two avenues. It can either go criminally or it can go for a civil remedy. So we have a very close relationship with criminal investigation, CI, as most people call it, and we send cases over there when it's appropriate, when we have egregious circumstances or egregious acts, and we have the ability to do civil fraud penalties. We have the ability to do injunctions. We have the ability to do repatriation orders through DOJ. And you're going to probably hear about that's why Carolyn's shop is so important, the National Fraud Counsel, because it gets us into those other areas. We have ability to work on.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Ability to work on promoters and professional enablers. And so those are kind of some of the biggest places that we're focusing on.
So that's a pretty broad portfolio of things that you've got going on. I mean, would it be fair to characterize the Fraud Enforcement Office as almost an umbrella division within the IRS that's looking for fraud wherever it may arise and making sure that it gets followed up on by the agents?
Exactly. As you said earlier, we sit in SBSC, but we are a service-wide organization. We work with WNI. We work with our partners in LBNI, and TEGE in all matters. So anywhere that fraud may arise, we need to be there, and we need to have assets and agents working to assist the compliance officers in this total compliance effort. And that's really what it is. And at the end of the day, we need to deter these nefarious actions and make people come into compliance, those who aren't willing to do it by themselves.
Thanks, Damon. Carolyn, Damon mentioned that one of the most important parts of this Fraud Enforcement Office is the role of Office of Chief Counsel and your role. Can you tell us what the Office of Chief Counsel does with respect to the Fraud Enforcement Office?
Sure. Thanks, Bryan. Thanks so much for having me and Damon on the program today. One of the things that we are doing is partnering with the Office of Fraud Enforcement as well as with the IRS with respect to providing, kind of a broad list of things to help in the effort to thwart fraud and encourage, fraud development, where appropriate through cases. So I stood up as the National Fraud Counsel in May of this past year and have been working closely to not only to, strengthen our partnership, but also to identify other areas where counsel might be able to add value in this process. The National Fraud Program has long had a relationship with IRS counsel, as there are counsel attorneys located, throughout every major geographic area in the United States. And so we have continued to not only work with that structure, but we have also stood up a team of counsel fraud specialists throughout all of our offices, both in SB as well as in TEGE and LBNI, to work with the civil folks. Now, that being said, there's a couple of different areas that we are working with, and that is, number one, helping with the development of civil fraud cases and also helping fraud enforcement advisors, who work in the Office of Fraud Enforcement, as well as other compliance officers, meaning revenue officers and revenue agents, identify if there are firm indicators of fraud that would then lead to a criminal fraud referral, which, as you know, is reserved for our most severe criminal tax fraud offenders. So those are the two areas that we are helping in. We are also providing some legal analysis on some new legislation that's coming on. We're working on some other kind of discrete projects, as Damon mentioned, with respect to our litigation strategy as far as repatriation of certain offshore assets, which we've seen come up in quite a few different cases and a variety of scenarios. And we are also providing kind of a new way of looking at the way we're approaching fraud cases from a legal standpoint. I think one of the things that our office can really bring to the table as far as strengthening the fraud portfolio, or I guess the fraud umbrella, as you noted, is the ability for us to synthesize evidence to present a case and to figure out if we have the requisite evidence in order to meet the elements of a certain penalty or a certain charge. And so I'm referring to an element-based review that we are doing of the cases as agents are bringing it to us to really kind of help the compliance officer in identifying areas of weakness or maybe areas of strength, and then packaging it up either in a civil fraud penalty case or in a potential criminal fraud referral. So that's some of the things that we're doing across the board. There are 3 attorneys that have been detailed to work with me. Also, and similar to Damon's shop, this is a service-wide position, but I am housed in SBSE as well.
And would you say, Caroline, that there are more Office of Chief Counsel attorneys involved in the fraud area these days than there were in the past?
I'd say probably yes, because there are designated individuals. But at the same time, counsel has always had a fairly strong presence, I think, with the IRS. As I noted, there are, offices located throughout the United States, and there are counsel attorneys that are specifically assigned to work with a particular group of revenue agents or revenue officers. So standing up these additional fraud specialists does not take away that structure, because there is, very much still an open dialogue at that level also. But I think adding the additional support with identified counsel fraud specialists does increase the number of attorneys that are helping, but also gives the fraud enforcement advisors, a partner to go into these cases with. So not only is the fraud counsel specialist providing support to the fraud enforcement advisor, but again to a lot of the frontline attorneys that are out there that are working these cases as well.
Terrific. I wonder if either of you can give me some ideas. Oh, I'm sorry, Damon. Did you want to comment on that?
No, I wanted to say Carolyn's shop has done a lot in the way of training also, in terms of interviewing skills, memo writing, criminal tax boot camps, just a variety of trainings that has increased the acumen and understanding, the fraud acumen and understanding of our compliance agents and officers. It's just been remarkable how they've been able to get in there and do that.
That sounds pretty interesting. I'd like to check out one of those criminal fraud, tax fraud boot camps. See what's going on.
There you go. Hey, it's tough. It's tough.
So, can either of you give me an idea of some of the types of cases you guys are working on these days? What is the Fraud Enforcement Office focusing its time and effort on, and what are some of the priorities for you guys?
Sure, Damon, I can take that one. So I think there's a couple of areas of focus. First of all, virtual currency. I think we've seen the explosion of regular folks and criminals getting involved in the area of digital currency. We've seen the addition to the 2019 tax return of the question, whether or not a taxpayer engaged in any virtual currency transactions. We've seen it as a draft, going on to the 2020 return. So that is a huge area of focus for the IRS and also for the Office of Fraud Enforcement. I think that all of the civil functions of the IRS have been equally active in the cybercrimes area, building a synergy with not only IRS criminal investigation, but also focusing on the mission of promoting civil tax compliance. So the Office of Fraud Enforcement has provided a tremendous amount of collaboration and partnership throughout the civil function in building virtual currency cases, building building fraud cases, as well as securing kind of the necessary software and tools that we need to be able to combat that. So I think virtual currency is an area. Also in the area of high-income non-filers, it's a huge focus of the service, and that there have been a lot of reports and a lot of I think media attention surrounding those types of individuals, and that's an area of concern for the service. Obviously when there are high-income either non-filers or high-income delinquent filers, I think those are particular areas of focus. The Office of Fraud Enforcement has also been looking at, the types of offshore vehicles that have been used for many years as far as evading tax. And it seems that there are quite a bit of domestic promoters involved in that, so that's another area. And the Office of Fraud Enforcement has been working closely with the promoter office that was recently set up, earlier this year as well. So I think virtual currency, high-income non-filers, promoter cases, those are just kind of a handful of areas that OFE has been interested in. And Damon, you can probably add about 50 more.
I would just add one more. I think everybody knows we were pushed into this pandemic with this COVID-19, and so with that is opportunities for those nefarious actors to try and pull money away from the government. So the COVID fraud has been a big focus, and that kind of turned our attention, our focus for OFE to be more outward facing. We have had to interact with SBA, FDA, FEMA, the Disaster Relief Fund. We had to be more outward facing because every time the government as a whole is giving out relief packages, unscrupulous people will take stolen ID and go to each of us and try and grab money, try and claw money from the government. So it's important that we're kind of working together. It's kind of important that we defend against those actions. Because this relief should go to the people that actually need it and get to the right hands. So that's what the Office of Fraud Enforcement is doing, ensure that we're putting that money in the people that really actually deserve it and not just people who fill out an application to get the money.
I'm glad to hear that there is some enforcement around that to make sure that people are following the rules. Should we be expecting to see an uptick in cases around stimulus-related fraud or the COVID Act-related fraud types of things?
Certainly. Yes, it is an area of focus, and we have been focused on it very diligently. So, you can expect that, certainly.
And overall, as a practitioner, would we be expecting to see more fraud penalties being asserted out there in exams and more referrals perhaps from the civil division over to the criminal division? It seems like this focus on fraud, the creation of the Fraud Enforcement Office, is over time going to have some impact on that.
I think you can expect that, Bryan. I think where appropriate, the compliance officers are looking at that as a possible avenue as far as a penalty, as well as, in terms of a criminal referral, where appropriate. So, again, I think that the focus has been on bringing back some basic investigative skills and looking at our different avenues for how we can eradicate some of the, tax abuse that's going on there. We certainly recognize that there are millions and millions of Americans who work extremely hard to talk to their tax return preparer, to find a good, competent tax return preparer, to talk with them, to give them, the receipts, whether it's in a shoebox or an Excel spreadsheet or a Quicken program, to fill out their tax return and to do it timely and accurately and to the best of the ability that they can. But as Damon kind of kicked off our presentation today, unfortunately there are those who aren't quite as noble, and so that's really where the office comes into play. We are looking at not only protecting the process, but also protecting, the hundreds of millions of people who are filing their tax returns in a timely manner. So this focus on fraud is something that I think is bringing the issue to light, and we're hoping that the commissioners, constant speaking on this topic, as well as some of the enforcement measures that the IRS is undertaking, is going to send the message that, people need to make sure that they are not only following the rules, but also that they are not taking steps to either, set up structures like we've seen with a lot of the syndicated conservation easement structures, or to set up and participate in offshore structures, or to use, new kind of cutting-edge technology such as, crypto and some of the digital currency stuff that we're seeing, to thwart their basic obligations to file a true and complete tax return.
Okay, well, I think that our time is just about up. So, Carolyn and Damon, I want to thank you for taking the time for this interview and also for your efforts on behalf of the Internal Revenue Service and the tax system as a whole. I agree with both of you that it's important to make sure that everybody pays their fair share so that taxpayers can have confidence in the system, and they'll be willing to come forward and self-assess accurately. So I think it's an essential thing that you do, and thanks for all your time and effort.
No, thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us here.